Good Lord, he won't step forward. Amid hundreds of gazes at the charity event in Sonoma's private hangar, single-father billionaire Lucas Maddox stood frozen when he saw his son, Oliver, rigid before the flight simulator cockpit. 2 years after his mother's death in a plane crash, Oliver's dream of becoming a pilot had turned into a haunting fear. And when every expert and every therapy failed, a waitress stepped forward, not with fame, but with a simple embrace. An embrace that lifted the boy's gaze to the sky once more. All right, my dear viewers, get ready for a story that will leave you speechless. Take a second to like the video, subscribe, and drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see people joining us from all around the world. Please don't make me, I can't do it. Amid scattered applause, the hum of the flight simulator, and soft music drifting from the stage, Oliver Maddox's cry cut through the air like a knife slicing a hopeful balloon. The 11-year-old, only son of Lucas Maddox, billionaire of the aerospace and tech world, shrunk back on the steps leading into the cockpit simulator. He did not sob loudly. He tensed, fighting to hold back tears, but they still fell, quietly, painfully. His face drained of color, throat parched, and his entire body shook in trembling pulses, like a plane wing losing balance. Lucas darted forward, instincts of a father convinced he had prepared for every scenario. But as he knelt before his son, Lucas realized all his skills, negotiation, leadership, control, meant nothing against a broken child. He whispered soothing words, familiar lines memorized from countless therapy sessions. But Oliver shook his head so hard it startled him. Oliver didn't need reassurance. He needed escape. Immediately, around them, heads turned. Some worried glances, quiet murmurs. An event coordinator stepped forward, but Lucas signaled him back. The entire hangar seemed to hold its breath. And then, she appeared. Rowan Vega came from the edge of the event, still wearing her serving gloves, dressed simply in black with her hair tied high. No one knew her name. No one had noticed her until that moment. She had no formal role in this part of the program, yet somehow she was there, at exactly the right time. Rowan did not say, "I'm sorry," nor did she ask, "Are you okay?" She didn't try to show empathy or ingratiate herself. She simply knelt beside Oliver, closing the distance he needed to keep from falling apart. She did not touch him. She did not coo. She spoke one sentence softly and sincerely. "I've been scared like you." No drama, no theatrics. Just truth, a small, ordinary truth no one expected, but exactly what Oliver needed to hear. She spoke slowly, her voice slightly hoarse from winds buffeting a cabin at 35,000 feet. She told him that when she was 10, after moving to a camp in Arizona, she was put on a plane all alone. She panicked, cried until she collapsed, and no one spoke to her until a flight attendant sat down beside her and told stories of the sky, of stars flying alongside her as if they too were on that plane. Rowan's gaze never left Oliver's. "I became a flight attendant because I didn't want children like me to be afraid forever." There was no applause, no background music, yet in that instant Oliver stopped crying. He looked at her not with hesitation or defiance, but with a long look, as if to see if her words could truly be real. Then, with a small, trembling but clear, nod, he placed his tiny hand on the simulator's control panel. Rowan said nothing more. She stood and walked beside him, light as the breeze. And when they both stepped into the cockpit mock-up, Lucas, still standing, hands clenched, held his breath. No one guided the boy. No one handled the controls for him. Oliver turned into the seat, facing forward. Rowan sat beside him, neither touching nor speaking. When the screens lit up and he began to adjust altitude with tentative motions, the room seemed hypnotized. Everyone watched a child they'd barely known choose courage for the first time in 2 years of fear. Applause burst forth as the simulation ended, but Lucas did not clap. He could not, fearing that if he opened his hands, he might lose the fragile thing stirring in his chest, the renewed belief that his son would be okay. But who was she? And how could a nameless woman achieve what his whole world could not?
Welcome to 30 Millionaire Stories, where success meets solitude, and every story heals a hidden wound. Subscribe and discover the heart behind the fortune.
The next day, when the airport lay nearly deserted, the red carpet rolled up, private jets taxied away, and no one could quite recall every detail of the previous night's charity gala. Lucas Maddox was still searching. Not for partners, not for investors, but for the woman who had wrapped his son in a hug forged from the very stillness Lucas himself could not summon. He did not know her name until an event staffer flipped through the sign-in register, checked the shifts, and pointed to one small entry. Rowan Vega, a temporary address, a gig work contract, no social media presence, virtually invisible in a world where everyone clung to the spotlight. Yet to Lucas, she was the center of a miracle. He did not call. He did not send an assistant. He did not invite her to his office. He drove himself to the diner where she worked, waiting patiently until her shift ended. When Rowan saw him standing by his sleek black car, shirt sleeves rolled up, no tie, no envelope in hand, just a man's earnest gaze saying thank you more profoundly than words, she froze. He did not mention last night. He did not reframe it as an invitation. He spoke only of Oliver, of how the boy had not stopped talking about the woman who knew how to breathe through fear. And asked if she had the time, just 1 hour each week, would she come to his home in Healdsburg. Rowan hesitated. Childhood instincts forged by years of uncertainty don't vanish easily. She was used to being judged, exploited, made into a narrative ornament. But before she could find an excuse, a small voice spoke behind Lucas. It was Oliver, clutching an old book about airplanes, his eyes no longer clouded by panic but filled with expectation. "Can you teach me how to breathe in the cockpit?" he asked. A single question, soft as the breeze, yet weighty as a cry for help no child should ever need to voice. And Rowan understood. Rescuing a child from fear is not something everyone can do, but she could do what others would not dare. She could stay, so she came. At first, every Wednesday afternoon, promptly. Carrying a worn canvas bag filled with 1980s printed manuals, stained flight maps, and a few hand-tinted photos of vintage cockpits. She did not teach like an instructor. She did not drill Oliver on technical specs. She told stories, of engine roars echoing inside an aircraft's belly like a guardian heartbeat, of the hush encountered at cloud level, of closing your eyes and imagining you are drifting. No curriculum, no homework, simply someone who had once been afraid, sitting beside a child learning not to be. Oliver listened, not as a student but as a soul in recovery. Those afternoons were never about words but about the rustle of paper, the scratch of pencil tracing flight paths, and occasional laughter when a sketched plane's wing went askew or its cockpit towered too large. Lucas never interrupted. But he was always there, sometimes on the balcony, sometimes feigning interest in the newspaper in the dining room. He watched his son change. Not suddenly, but little by little, his shoulders relaxing, his face loosening, and his gaze learning to seek the sky without flinching. And in that silence, something Lucas did not expect happened. He changed too. Not because Rowan taught some grand lesson, but because for the first time in a long while, in his too large, too quiet home, he heard a familiar sound he feared he'd never hear again. The sound of life, the rustling of old pages turning, the patter of a child's feet down the hallway, and the voice of a woman sharing her fear in a tone so gentle, it made someone want to linger just a little longer. But did she know that she was also teaching Lucas how to breathe again after a journey of loss that seemed endless? Rowan Vega never saw herself as someone who spoke up. Since childhood, she'd learned to survive in silence, hovering at the edge of every gathering, living among strangers who never stayed past one summer, and giving up the last slice of pie to whoever had the loudest voice. Yet now, each morning, as children from underprivileged neighborhoods in Oakland and Fresno filed into the old warehouse on the outskirts of Petaluma, Rowan stood among them, not as their leader, but as someone who had once been in their place, someone who had emerged from poverty, lack, and the ache of being forgotten. No one knew that beyond her gig job at events, she secretly coordinated a small volunteer network called Wings of Wonder. A name sounding like a fairy tale, yet its work was deeply real. Alongside retired flight attendants, avionics engineers, and a few pilots, she collected old simulators, refurbished each control panel and cable, then ran free flight simulation sessions for kids who had never left their hometown. Every tip she earned at night events went into a glass jar labeled Fuel Hope. She lived simply, scrimped on food, slept little, never complained. No sponsorship, no press coverage, no TV feature. But inside that worn-out warehouse, where airplane seats perched on cinder blocks and engine noises played on outdated software, those children, for the first time, saw themselves at the controls. For Rowan, that was enough. Until one afternoon, when a sudden storm drenched the yard and she and a few kids were wiping moisture off the touchscreens with old rags, a lone figure stood in the rain. It was Lucas Maddox. No bodyguards, no umbrella. No words of greeting. He simply watched quietly as though unsure he belonged there. Rowan noticed him but kept working. She didn't need an audience for her service, and Lucas somehow understood that. He did not step forward or offer assistance. But that evening, he sat at his desk for a long time before a blank check. No company logo, no embossed envelope, only a short sender line. "The Sky Belongs to All of Us Foundation." He signed nothing, left no note, but the amount covered 2 years of simulator upkeep, software upgrades, and even funding a professional instructor. When Rowan received that check in the mail, she could hardly believe her eyes. She turned it over and over. No return address, no personal letter, nothing but the foundation's name, as if someone had whispered it into the night sky. She wept not for the money, but because someone had seen her efforts and asked nothing in return. The following week, as she arrived at Lucas's home as usual, Oliver ran out to greet her with buoyant steps, as if each sighting of her eased a little more of his fear. He hugged her tightly, no request, no question. Lucas watched from a distance. He did not ask about the check. He did not mention knowing. But when their eyes met for a fleeting moment, wordless understanding passed between them. Some gestures of generosity are too vast for words. Did Rowan realize she was doing far more than teaching children to fly? She was rekindling faith in kindness across a sky that once seemed closed. My dear viewers, take a moment to relax or grab a drink, then stay tuned for the next surprising chapter. Comment 1 if you're still with us and enjoying the story. No one expected a clip under 30 seconds to set the sky aflutter. A mother attending the flight simulation charity event in Santa Rosa happened to film Oliver, his small hands steady, piloting the controls in the mock cockpit. The lighting was soft, the screens displayed a cloudless blue sky. Beside him stood Rowan, her eyes following his every move as if she were holding open his invisible wings. And in the frame's background, Lucas Maddox, the man the press dubbed icy in the boardroom, was smiling. Not the sort of smile he reserved for shaking investors' hands, but a fleeting lightness, just enough to show. Some moments, however brief, can heal. The video went up on a small social account, yet it soon topped 1 million views. Every platform echoed it. Headlines across feeds read, "Boy overcomes fear with a single embrace." Viewers called it a miracle, a triumph of the human spirit, exactly what the world was missing. But viral fame often breeds equally swift backlash. Within days, a handful of aviation insiders began scrutinizing the woman in the video. A name surfaced on a closed executive forum, Rowan Vega. They recalled she'd once been a flight attendant at a major airline and had caused an inconvenience. Years earlier, she'd filed an internal safety report about a cabin pressure issue that the airline had covered up to protect its image. She followed procedures, kept quiet, but they still let her go. No formal complaint, only a terse email, then years of silence. Now, as her name reappeared, this time bathed in positive light, they pounced. A complaint filed in federal court, unauthorized disclosure of proprietary corporate information. The allegation was thin, wrapped in razor-sharp legalese. Rowan showed no surprise. She did not lawyer up. She did not seek bailouts. She simply gathered her flight maps, pulled the cockpit photos from the walls, and packed them into a single cardboard box. It was not her first retreat, and in her heart she knew. When people insist you vanish, the only way to satisfy them is to disappear. A few volunteers caught wind and asked if she needed help. Rowan merely shook her head. She was used to being left behind, to feeling that her deeds only mattered when her name stayed unspoken. But this time, someone refused to let her vanish. A week after the suit was filed, at the first hearing in federal court in San Jose, Rowan walked in wearing dark attire and carrying the same beat-up tote from simulation sessions. The person beside her this time was not fear, but the full senior legal team of Maddox Aerodynamics. Lucas Maddox entered the courtroom as though it were the meeting he'd prepared his entire life for. No microphone, no speech. Just a brief statement for the press, cameras raised. The truth is not something to be hidden. It's the fuel that lets good people soar. He did not glance at the old airline. He did not address the public. He looked only at Rowan, the woman whose dream had been stamped out simply because she dared to speak what no one wanted to hear. In that moment, no one cared about damages, legal wrangling, or who won. All that remained was the rare stillness of a woman who once lived beneath the radar, now sitting tall in the halls that once judged her. And somewhere in the crowd, a few children who'd quietly dubbed her flight teacher grasped each other's hands, unaware of legal doctrines but crystal clear on this. That woman was the reason they dared to dream. But will Rowan stay this time? Or does she still believe that, for those who dare to speak the truth, the world offers only temporary wings? Some victories don't come from courtroom applause or triumphant headlines, but from the quiet pride of a woman stepping through your front door without bowing her head. Rowan Vega was vindicated, not by luck, but by something rarer. Stubborn resolve without bitterness and kindness that expects no credit. The media dubbed her the woman who returned children to the sky. Press outlets dissected the lawsuit, amplified her title, and constructed images she never asked to represent. But in Rowan's heart, the only thing she truly saw was the children's eyes, no longer viewing her as a temporary adult, but as someone who could stay. Lucas did not wait for the media frenzy to die down. He invited her on a short trip, no private jet. They drove winding country roads through sunlit vineyards to a patch of land beside an old airstrip near a small town. There, a two-story concrete building had been renovated into classrooms with freshly painted white walls. On the tables sat neatly arranged model airplanes. A few simple simulators hummed back to life. A sign above the door read, Sonoma Youth Flight Initiative. Lucas asked Rowan to head the program, not as a patron, not as repayment, but because he understood. The most fragile flyers sometimes need someone who has fallen to know how to lift them up. She agreed, not for the title, but because her heart told her this place could be home, not only for her, but for every child who once believed they weren't worthy of dreaming beyond the roof over their heads. At the Academy's ribbon cutting, early summer light streamed through high windows, casting soft gold streaks across the new wooden floor. Chairs were neatly arranged. Guests were not officials or investors, but parents, students, silent volunteers, and a few retired pilots who had worked with Rowan. Oliver wore a tiny pilot's jacket, sleeves a bit long, and polished black leather shoes. He stood beside Rowan, holding together a model airplane they had built over weekend workshops. When he climbed onto the small platform in the center of the hall, his voice trembled, but his eyes shone as if reflecting the very sky he once feared. "She didn't teach me to fly," he announced, loud enough for all to hear. "She taught me to believe I deserved to." Silence fell. No one spoke. Then applause broke out, but Lucas Maddox did not clap. He sat in the front row, watching his son, the boy who once hid in the corner, now standing confidently before a crowd, and looking at the woman resting her hand gently on his shoulder, her quiet kindness on full display. In that moment, Lucas was no longer a CEO, a leader, or a builder of tech empires. He was simply a father, finally able to let go of control, because the greatest healing his son needed had arrived, not through his own hands, but through someone he could never have predicted. Something in him began to thaw, unhurried, unspoken, like the morning mist dissolving in the warm sunrise. For sometimes, the most beautiful gift you can give your child is acknowledging you cannot do it all yourself, but you can open the door and let someone compassionate hold their heart in your stead. And did Rowan realize that, by returning the children to the sky, she was also guiding a man back to fatherhood through a gesture of trust and release? September in Sonoma closes out summer with honeyed light cascading down from the western hills. On the old runway, there were no roaring engines or radio chatter, only children's laughter and the breeze rustling handmade aircraft models crafted from cardboard, popsicle sticks, and boundless dreams. A simple, radiant gathering was held on the very strip that once trained pilots, now reborn as a youth flight academy. No grand backdrops, no spectacular show, just children who once feared flight, now sharing their journeys before an audience. Each story was a silent takeoff. Oliver, taller now and more composed, yet still bearing eyes that had known fear, stepped onto the white-lined courtyard, carrying the very first simulator model he had built. He paused before the wooden benches, looked up, then pointed to an empty seat beside him. Rowan. No one knew what would follow until Oliver smiled, a rare, effortless grin, and motioned for her to join him. She hesitated not from fear, but from emotion. Then she slid onto the adjacent bench as she once had in the simulator, and the boy began his first flight again, this time with no tears, no tremors. Just calm, confident controls and eyes fixed on the flight path display, as if for the first time he truly believed the sky was his home. After the demonstration, children swarmed in celebration. Some begged to take pictures with Oliver. Others asked Rowan to autograph tiny cardboard wings. Laughter echoed across the valley, along the runway that had become the launchpad for seemingly small moments, yet enough to transform a life. When the crowd dispersed, Rowan did not stay to receive bouquets. She quietly cleared tables and gathered paper cups just as she always did. Those hands, once raised to the heavens, never considered gathering trash or stacking chairs beneath them to be beneath her. Perhaps because she understood, miracles do not come from how high you stand, but by how humbly you stoop to lift others. Lucas approached, no flowers, no ring, no stirring speech. Simply a man in rolled-sleeve shirt, bare-faced and more honest than ever. He stood silently for a long moment, needing no concealment. "You never had to live in my world," he said, voice steady as if long prepared for this confession, "because I want to build a new world with you." Rowan did not respond immediately. She shed no tears, did not embrace him as in a romance film. Yet she did not walk away. She did not retreat as before. She stood still, turned to him, and for the first time felt no need to guard herself. For in that world no one asked how many times she'd failed. No one probed the scars she carried. They asked only one simple question, enough to open the biggest door she once feared to cross. "Where do you want to fly from here?" On the distant lawn, Oliver sat alone, clutching his well-worn flight map, legs folded protectively as if holding his greatest treasure. He did not look at his father. He did not look at Rowan. But the gentle smile on his face, soft as a zephyr, said everything. No one declared them a family. No group photo, no paperwork. Yet everyone there, whether a child once afraid to ascend or an adult once lost, knew this truth. They embodied everything a family should be, simply without needing to be named. Sometimes, what a child needs most is not someone saying, "Everything will be okay," but someone patient enough to sit beside them until they believe it themselves. Oliver, Rowan, and Lucas's story reminds us, no one is too small to dare, and no one too wounded to begin again. Whatever you have feared, wherever you have failed, there is always a place, a person, a moment that can open for you a door in the sky you thought forever closed. If this story touched you, leave a comment below. Tell us, who is the Rowan in your life, or have you been the Lucas, the Oliver? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who needs to hear. Dreams are never too late, and family is often found, not born. Thank you for staying until the end. See you in the next story.